so our audience know, just for the camera, who are you, Vinoba? What exciting projects have you worked on?
Oh, tough question. So my name is Vinoba Vinayagamoorthy. People just call me Vino because people get intimidated with the long name, I suppose. I am a technology strategy analyst with Samsung.
Nice.
We have an open innovation department as part of the technology strategy group for us globally, and my specific sort of focus is on Europe and with mobile devices, and I guess how we work with operators like the various operators that give us our network connectivity. My background is in VR and AR. Once we went through the sort of metaverse kind of phase. But VR and AR, I guess, is still how I like to refer to it. And before that, I was with the BBC and UCL as well. So I was an academic, but now I'm fully corporate, I guess.
I see. So tell me a bit more, because I want to start from earlier part of your journey to where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
What's your experience with the BBC like?
So I've only ever been with two industry organizations, I guess. So the first one was the BBC and the second one has been Samsung. They are like night and day. I thought the BBC was huge, and it is huge, of course, it's well known. And I love the corporation still. But its public service is obviously British. It's well known in this country, has an institution, a traditional institution. And we shouted out about everything we did. Mm-hmm. Whereas Samsung is corporate, it's a Korean-based company. We have a lot of proprietary sort of work, obviously, and it's huge, so much bigger in terms of just the number of people, the number of bases, the number of countries we cover, and so it's been an interesting difference coming from my sort of 14 and a half years of background with a public service company to a corporate environment. But it's going well. It's going great. It's been a steep learning curve. And
I see.
We'll see.
More about that learning curve. Was it quite jarring transitioning from BBC over to Samsung and just how huge it was?
I think it's taken, so I've been with Samsung for a year and 10 months. I think it'll be about 2 years in May. So that's the right maths. Mm-hmm. It is taken me probably about 6 months of that first 6 months just getting into the whole workings of things. I work with people in Korea, so the headquarters, which is based in Suwon in South Korea. And so there's a different way of working. You can't just walk up to the desk of your counterpart there to talk about things. And we have quite a bit of a team across Europe as well. Mm-hmm. So it's been interesting trying to work with people who you see online. I've met them here and there, but mostly online. And also it's, you're trying to understand how the corporation already, or rather the organization already has its own sort of path, and you kind of try and understand how to put your passions into that path and make it worthwhile. Whereas previously, I guess, it was much more future seeing in terms of a public service organization doing things for the good of community, so to speak. And so the remit was much wider, and you could essentially make anything fit into a public service sort of role. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Samsung, it's very clear what we're there to do and what we sort of want to do. And so you kind of fit into that. So it's a different way of thinking, I guess.
I see. Okay. You touched on about how you would apply your passions to that specific direction. I know your passion is extended reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that something you've always been into?
After my first degree, yes. So when I finished my first degree in the mid 2001, so the early 2000s, I guess, search engines, which we now verb as a Google instead of search, they were just about coming up. And even though the search engine existed, information about things wasn't there because people wrote very little web pages compared to what we have now. So VR was not a thing that people knew about. I certainly didn't. I knew about animation, 3D space. My first graduate degree, or rather undergraduate project, was in 3D and animation.
That's cool.
But did not know about VR. In fact, I had a whole PhD lined up with University of Surrey, which was the place I did my undergrad, to sort of do a 3D scanning of human bodies kind of PhD. So visual sort of hull reconstruction of spaces, that kind of thing. And so that was making 3D models, and that was what I was going to do. But I went for a summer internship with UCL across the road, and they had a 3x3x3 meter cube VR room where you could see life-size 3D models. And my very first 3D model was a DNA strand, life-size, and I think I was hooked. So I knew that was where I
must have been like. For its time, that must have been like one of a kind, sure.
It was amazing. I mean, I had never seen anything like that. I hadn't watched the Tomorrow World's sort of programs that showed that kind of thing, mostly because we had less channels anyway, and I was busy doing other things. Yes. But that first viewing was mind blowing. I think it's very. I still think it's a very mind blowing experience to have a room with visual projections put up in front of you. Headsets are cool, but it's very different seeing it life-size right there in front of your face. It's very visceral, I think. But it's very convincing, and so I decided to dedicate a PhD to it. And my first job as a research fellowship was with VR, and now everyone knows what VR is. So it's very interesting. It's very different to sort of live in this sort of decade, I guess, compared to the previous one.
It must have been, because obviously like VR now is like very mainstream. Well, maybe not very mainstream, but you tell someone, do you know what VR is, they're probably going to be able to tell you.
Yes.
That must have been really cool, just watching it throughout the decades just become more in the public eye, and probably watching the technology evolve as well.
Yeah, it's. I think the accessibility to the devices that you can see VR in is improved. And obviously nowadays you can have VR sort of versions on your mobile phones with the magic window to sort of look around. And, you know, my 10-year-old and 14-year-olds, they know what VR is probably for 5 years now. So there's a lot of, at least in this country, we know exactly what it is, and we have a lot of expectations of what it can do as well. I think the magic of when I was in it way back is that no one really knew what to expect from it, and we were still learning about what the best applications are, what effects it had on human beings when you were in that space, how to best build environments. Nowadays, anyone can go and sort of just build things and prototype it and get it up and running. Back then, it was a little bit slower.
Imagine.
So, you know, and of course, when you talk about it to people, very few people really understood the magic of it, I guess. Whereas now, you know what it is, and you have an opinion on it, I suppose. Maybe not everyone, but a lot more people than before.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's definitely become more popular. Yeah. So if I'm not mistaken, you wanted to explore the social connections that could be, let's say, realized through extended reality? Is that right?
Yeah, I think most technologies that really make it are technologies that enable social connections, human beings to human beings, right? I mean, obviously we have much more basic human needs that are important to living, as in to exist, I guess. But in terms of enjoying life is to talk to someone else and connect with them, play with them, you know, exchange ideas with them. So, I mean, take the mobile phone, the mobile device, for instance. Even that, the evolution of how many people have and how many different choices you might have, that's changed, and that's all to do mostly with its ability to give you a way to talk to someone, talk to my mom, who happens to be in Sri Lanka, for instance. Anywhere I am, driving down the M25, which was not something that you could do back then, right? Same thing to do with social media platforms, again, is that ability to connect, share things, share ideas, show off yourself, whatever, right? It's all about how you portray yourself to others and what sort of conversations you have with different people. So VR is the same. I think social VR has this ability to have a representation of someone who is far away from you together in a space is quite powerful, and that's certainly something that it gives you not just a behavioral sort of response and this ability to communicate, but also I think physiological responses to, you know, and not many technologies can do that. So yeah, that was essentially.
Yes, I'm very glad you brought up how it comes down to connection at the end of the day, because I wholeheartedly agree. I personally think that's why social media has kind of... I was talking to John Roberts about it a while back when we had him on. It's the idea that there's been kind of like an innovation drought, as it were, where for the past decade or so it's just been social media followed by social media. Obviously, you probably know far more about that than myself. That's just from mine and John's very layman view of like what's mainstream, I suppose. But you are right. It usually just comes down to people and connection, and that's why these technologies do so well in both innovation and business. So I'm very glad you pointed that out. Now, on the flip side of that, I'm curious to know what kind of, if there are any, what sort of dangers lie in extended reality and perhaps the how that tampers with connection. Could you think of anything like that?
I could. So I think it's Jaron Lanier who will probably talk much more about the dangers of not just social media, but also extended reality and how that might affect society in the future. And there are a lot of those disadvantages or sort of dangers that I agree could happen and might happen, but that's true of any innovation or any technology. Since the caveman came out of his caves and, discovered fire or how to use fire, put fire in the hands of an arsonist is dangerous. So I think there are lots of tools, and it is up to people and society in general to sort of build not barriers, but build sort of safety policies barriers, and safety sort of mechanisms to... The thing is, when you go into VR, you're still human beings, and you still take whatever you are in the real world, and you transfer it into VR itself. And so whatever people would want to do with anything else in the real world, they might do it in VR as well. And considering that there's such a visceral reaction to virtual things in that space, it does have it might have the ability to affect different people differently if you had malicious intent. But at the end of the day, VR is a tool. And so inherently, the technology itself is just the technology. It's what we do with it, right?
100%. I mean, hammer, it can, punch nails into a wall, or it can tear down a house. I 100% agree with that. So it's kind of, I like the very... if I'm not mistaken, you have a more optimistic approach to VR and probably technology in general, if I'm not mistaken.
I think in my career and in my sort of building technologies or talking about technologies, yes, I loved VR. I mean, I still love VR, which is why I still go about talking about it. I will work with it, and if someone gave me a project tomorrow and Samsung said, "Hey, go and do something in this space," I'll totally put my hand up and go and do it.
Oh, brilliant!
But I do not own my own headset. I've never owned my headset. I've never been tempted to buy a headset either, because in my general, regular, day-to-day life, it is not a thing that will enhance my life yet. And it's not something that I would give as a birthday present to my kids either. But, I've not given them unlimited use of a mobile phone either. So this is going back to your idea of, your thoughts about dangers in technologies. I think there's a lot that you still have to learn about different technologies, and it is vital to sort of have a good understanding of different things around you. That VR is not any different. So if it gets to a point where VR is somehow vital to my regular day-to-day sort of life, and maybe there's some killer application that will come out, maybe Samsung will say, go and work on it, or for whatever reason you'll get a different reason to get it. Exactly. Well, yes, but so I'm passionate about it, but I still think there's some way to go, which is exciting. It means that other people can come in and build interesting things.
Sure. I want to talk a bit more about that actually, because you said there's a way to go yet before, I suppose it's...
We're still finding the balance, I think.
Yes. What kind of, be it infrastructure or software or conceptually, what kind of changes need to happen in order for it to be more, say, applicable?
So I think in terms of infrastructure, connectivity is important if you want to have that social VR space. We do have better connectivity available to us at homes, at least. On the go, if you're in a major city, yes, but there are still parts of the Lake District or the Isle of Skye that you could go in and you wouldn't have that. And so if you don't have connectivity, everything in terms of just communicating, using whatever technology breaks down. So infrastructure-wise, I think we have some way to go to try and ensure that everyone in the country has enough sort of bandwidth to be able to, for everyone to use XR technologies in whatever ways they can or they want to. But I think in terms of killer application, that still depends on each person. For instance, during the pandemic, having a social VR space helped us have an international conference on mobile hubs, Mozilla hubs rather, or OEA, both of which unfortunately have closed down. But we had social spaces, and they were very useful to bring in academics and students and industry experts from all over the world to IEEE VR or IMX or SIGCHI. I think that we had a hybrid version of that as well. But now that the pandemic has sort of died down-ish, that sort of need for it, people still prefer to go in person to conferences and things like that. So I think we're still searching for that. At the end of the day, we still have all different lives, and there will be a place where VR is good for it and VR is not. And for some people, that might be gaming. And for me, it's probably more about talking to people and having a social contact with friends and family who are not in my vicinity, maybe attending conferences. It's not gaming for me. So, I think it's going to be dependent on people and what they buy into over time to really understand what type of infrastructure, what type of devices are successful. So I don't think there's a clear answer to it, but we at least need connectivity equally, both upstream and downstream, in order to get that up and running, I guess.
Interesting. So, of course, and I can imagine like a lot of our users as well, my experiences with VR has been mostly about gaming. Love a game called Super Hot. So, honestly, the game's almost built for it. Because obviously your appreciation of VR comes from the idea that it enhances connection. You could be very far away. You mentioned your family in Sri Lanka. What would your infrastructure aside, or all realism aside, what would be your ideal sort of, let's say, perfect kind of VR experience where you are able to have that seamless connection? What would that look like?
Something that allows me to feel, well, apart from the social, I think just doing it with other people is still a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
But something that allows me to do things that I can't in the real world. I'm not going to be, I don't think I'm someone who, for instance, will enjoy visiting Paris in VR. I want to be in Paris. But if I can fly over Paris in VR, I think that's something that, I would like to do. There was a paper some time ago from UCL which had tails attached to human beings in VR and figured out how human beings change their behavior once they were given a virtual tail. And that was interesting. So essentially anything that will allow me to do things that I would normally not do, either due to a physical limitation or because I can't do it due to, financial cost or whatever it is. Anything that stops me doing it in the real world, if I can do it in VR, I think that's my personal sort of.
Do you know, I think a fantastic opportunity would be for VR, because I personally would use this a lot because I'm fascinated by space. But imagine if they could put a three-dimensional camera on a rover, say, on Mars, and you can tune in any time, and you could be real-time exploration with this rover.
I see no reason why that won't become a possibility in a few years' time. Content is probably even in simulations will do as well. I think I might be mistaken, but I think there are simulations out there that allow you to go to space and see what Mars might be like. Travel to different places. But once we land on Mars, and if there is enough connectivity and responsiveness to actually get that kind of feeling over here, then I don't see why that wouldn't be a thing. There are very good space exploration type programs out there. The BBC made one as well through their VR hub, which closed down some years back. But that essentially allowed you to do a kind of, what was that George Clooney movie in space with Sandra Bullock?
Ooh.
Gravity? Or is it not Interstellar? I think it was Gravity.
Cracking
Maybe
film,
it was Gravity. Excellent. And they had sort of this, apart from the explosions and things, but just this idea of floating around and sort of experiencing what VR could be. Add on a haptic suit, have some G-forces in there.
Ooh.
I think it's possible. Problem is how you make money out of it, but I'm sure that will come.
100%. Obviously, my experiences with VR anyway, and I'm sure users are very familiar with it as well. I'm sure you would have come across it in your research too. It's moving around in VR where you are static causes nausea. Yeah. I've noticed treadmills. Treadmills are like how you can do like a 360-degree treadmill. I think that would be really cool. A really nice innovation as well, because most games that then you'd be able to play, you could sprint and be static as well. Yeah. So you can see I'm getting very passionate about this.
There are a few technologies out there that sort of give you that feel. I often see them in a lot of industry exhibitions that I go to. But in South Korea, back in 2018, KBS, that's the Korean Broadcasting. I forget what the S stands for.
Station.
But they had a VR lab, and one of those things was essentially they had this sort of sphere that they would hang you on.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so you had haptic devices, and you had different experiences. They had like sword fights and things like that with sort of Korean horror. Very different experience to what I had seen in the UK. And those were really nice, and it gives and the sense of sort of levitation or the sense of being pulled in different directions. There was one where they had a sort of really freaky doll that would come to your face, and they blew air into your face at the same time. So you had this added, reinforcement of you actually being in that space, experiencing
proper immersion.
Yeah, so those are all things that, when you go for demonstrations or when you build exhibitions, those are exactly the things that help you feel that you are in that sort of space and you're experiencing things like that. There's a researcher in, I forget his name, I'm terrible with names, but there was a researcher in Disney, I think, who recently gained a Hall of Fame kind of award.
Yeah.
And he was showing these tiles on the floor that would essentially allow you to walk around, but in a small space. So there are technologies out there that are kind of slowly coming there. But again, how to make it more accessible. And I guess just like headsets sort of evolved and are still evolving, we'll probably have similar evolutions, but also try and figure out exactly where those technologies have a space in society in general.
Such fascinating stuff. I mean, my bread and butter is basically emerging technology, and my love for VR preceded my fascination with AI now. Of course, it wouldn't be a tech podcast if we didn't talk a little bit about AI.
I'm sorry, are you telling me you jumped from AI to AR or AR to AI?
I jumped from
AR.
my love for AR, which is the augmented reality, into AI.
Okay.
Mostly because of my research into how AI does things, convolutional neural networks.
Because you didn't commit to a technology.
Yeah, you could say that. I do bounce between what fascinates me, that's for sure. But obviously, I know like AI isn't necessarily your domain, but I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions on, say, where you think AI is headed, or even how AI can be applied to extended reality.
So we've used AI for quite a number of years, possibly had much more progress in it for a number of years in terms of commercialization compared to extended reality technologies, as I'm sure you know. Generative AI is, I guess, the hype at the moment.
Yeah.
It's what's got people excited. I remember talking to Goldsmiths students at some point when ChatGPT and similar systems started coming along, and I was like, well, you have these equivalent of NPCs in virtual social spaces, and having a chatbot attached to a virtual character, and you talking to it has to be the next very simple evolution on any social space that people create these days in VR. So, I think in terms of entertainment and in terms of engagement in social spaces, it's quite clear that AI or generative AI has a really clear goal in what it could bring to the table. Mm-hmm. I think anything else, again, it's a tool. So as society, we will find the right ways for it to be used. And it's still evolving. So it's quite difficult to... It will have a place in almost every sector, I think. Exactly how far we should be using in different sectors is what everyone is sort of grappling with at the moment, I think.
Okay. Interesting stuff.
So, for instance, if you had a 3-year-old, would you allow a AI service be the child's main source of information? Right?
Ooh, that's an interesting one.
If not, then what needs to be done in order to make that happen? Or do we think that social contact is important, and therefore a biological being such as a teacher should be there to mediate between the AI service and the teaching? So there are a lot of questions, even if you take a minuscule application and try to think about what AI can do in that space. I don't think there's a simple answer for it in one podcast.
If you had a simple answer for it, I'm sure I'd be a millionaire. That's for sure.
Why would you be the millionaire? Surely it's
that's very
it's
true.
My knowledge.
I could take the knowledge to the bank there, that's for sure. Oh, no, that is such interesting stuff. And regarding what you just said about integrating AI with children, it's an interesting topic, especially in pedagogy and education. My main worry anyway would be, if I had a child, how intimately does the AI know my child? Would it say for instance, I've seen educational technologies that use AI to scan children's faces to measure engagement, which of course is a big ethical concern there, because, data transparency, especially when everything's so new, it's I'd say fragile, put it that way. Mm-hmm. But yes, I 100% agree with you. There needs to be more safety rails put in place before technologies like that do eventually encroach on more sensitive matters like children, like pedagogy. But yeah, fascinated by those answers, that's for sure.
Yeah, finance. That's not... I mean, obviously it's important to people, but it's not as sensitive as, say, children. Would you trust a AI investment tool if it told you, hey, you need to buy this many shares or stocks in this particular thing? Or do you want an experienced investment banker to sit down there and tell you about the best way to invest your money for, say, pension funds? So it's not just the human element. I think there's regulations and things are still flowing, and we still don't know how terrible things can go, I guess. Yeah. And I'm not talking about doomsday thing. I'm talking about just general day-to-day things. If you start, say, putting AI systems into various things, and we already have, what's the impact? How does it affect people, and should we just go into it blindly, or do we need those regulations to be in there first? There are a lot of questions, and it's all evolving and still exciting spaces. But.
Oh, 100%. It's as they say, like the case studies are yet to be written because obviously everything's so new.
Yeah.
This kind of last part of like the episode, I want to talk a bit more about your character, because of course our main demographic is students at university, and like most university students my age, from 18 to mature student, like 25, they're very unsure about the future, especially with how rapidly it changes. I'd like to know, like, whereabouts were you at 20? Like, what kind of headspace you were in?
I was, so I'm Sri Lankan by heritage, but I lived in Nigeria all my life before I came to university. And I came here on a student visa as an international student. Yeah. At 20, I was on my third year at university, just finished industry. I think my placement in industry with Philips Semiconductors. And I knew that I had to get a work permit if I wanted to continue to stay in the UK after my final year. So I had a very clear sort of constraint on what I should be doing. And I think a lot of students probably have their own personal constraints. However, in the time when everyone was going into work in telecommunication industries, I decided that telecommunications was not what I wanted to go into. Just ironic since I'm now in the telecommunications sector again. But I wanted to do something with 3D graphics. And that's what eventually led me to do a research fellowship with UCL in VR. So I think it's important to sort of understand and be aware of your constraints, whether it's money issues, whether it's staying in the country issues, or whether it's not knowing what you want to do with life issues. But I think an element of trying to figure out what you're good at and what you would want to spend, 8 hours of your life on, those two are probably good ways of thinking about what you want to do with your future. I know some people might just go into the job that gives them the most financial gain, for instance. And maybe that's how things are done, how things work for that particular person. But for me, it was about doing something interesting and exciting that no one else were doing at that time, and being paid to do it. So at 20, I think I was quite pragmatic with maybe a 25% of sort of adventure. But I was always sensible. I always have been. First child syndrome.
Well, okay, yeah, that explains a fair bit. Just to wrap up everything, I mean, what small and sweet, like what kind of brief wisdom or advice would you give to someone who was 20, who was uncertain, that say wanted to achieve some of the great things you've achieved?
At 20, looking back, that's the time when I could do what I wanted without a sense of responsibility. I have a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old now, and I've got mortgages that need paying. So my sense of what I can do just because I want to do it has reduced. 20 is the perfect time to just make mistakes. Go out, figure out something that you want to do if you want to do it. Even if you're not sure that you want to do it, try it out. What's the worst that could happen? You do it for 3 months, decide to go and do something else. It makes things difficult if you are paying for your own rent, obviously, and if you don't have a fallback. But I think even in those circumstances, in this country at least, just that ages of sort of just coming out of university and going into your first job is where you can take a risk and do something a little bit different for maybe 5 years, 7 years at least. You should take advantage of it if you can. And if you can't, then maybe work towards getting to a period where you can take a little bit of a risk.
Yes.
And do something that gives you joy for 8 hours of your life on a regular basis.
Oh, absolutely brilliant advice. I 100% agree with you. Time at university, you can treat it somewhat like a safety net because...
It is a safety net.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you very much for that. Of course, if you just want to look in the camera and just like tell the audience where they can find your socials or where they can find your blog.
I am on all the socials. I'm also probably one of the most Google-worthy persons out there just because my name is Vinoba Vinayagamoorthy and you won't find another person on there yet. I have a website, vinoba.co.uk. That's probably the best place to go and hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Obviously, I'm on socials as well, but probably not the trendy socials that you young kids are on.
Oh, of course. Thank you very much for that. It's been lovely having you. Of course, if you did enjoy that, please tune in next time where we'll be interviewing Jessica Driscoll. We'll be talking more about immersive transport, some of the brilliant experiences she's had. See you then.